All right, Mary Ann, good to talk with you again.
It's always good to talk to you, Mark.
Let's start with some basic operational definition here. What is a mentally healthy workplace?
It's really one that optimizes the energy and the focus of each employee, no matter what's going on for them that day. So, my energy and focus on a good day is one level. On a day when I'm dealing with health, financial, family stressors, it's different. But if I am in a mentally healthy organization, they're going to optimize my energy and focus every day.
Now, that's all well and good for you as an individual single person working for maybe an individual employer, but employers are collections of people with sometimes wildly different needs. So, how do we accommodate everybody?
Well, and really that's part of what psychological health and safety is about, is that there are certain things that we already know are barriers or challenges to psychological health and safety. Some of those things are having chaos or confusion, having pressure or threats, having people who interact or treat each other in a way that isn't respectful. These are things that they affect everybody, no matter where you are on the spectrum of mental health and well-being that day. You know that those things are going to be problematic. Now, there's other things that are outside the scope for any employer, like your genetics or what's going on in your personal life that they're not aware of. That's outside of scope for them. But in the same way that we bring everybody into a workplace, we don't maybe know who has um, asthma. We may not know people who have very sensitive noses, but yet we know that we need to keep hazardous chemicals out of the way for everyone. Nobody should ingest them. And psychological health and safety is saying the hazards that are known to impact the well being of humans should be mitigated or eliminated.
Now, is psychological health and safety the same thing as a mentally healthy workplace, or is it a component of it?
I would say that a mentally healthy workplace is a component of psychological health and safety, as is inclusion, as is a good incident response, as is preparing and protecting employees for what they're exposed to. So, a mentally healthy workplace is one component of psychological health and safety.
Do you think that there are certain, not singling out individual employers, we can do that too if you want, but do you think that there are specific industries or type of work that tend to be at higher risk of being psychologically unsafe?
Well, I mean, the obvious is what we're now calling public safety personnel. So, first responders, healthcare, because they're exposed on a regular basis to incidents and situations that hopefully most of us only see once in a lifetime or never. So, absolutely, that group of people. But Mark, we've heard about the grocery store clerk who was assaulted at work. We've heard about the librarian who's threatened by somebody who comes in off the street and they're high on drugs. We've heard about the receptionist where somebody's come in and said, I have a weapon. So yes, there are people that are more likely to be exposed to things that can damage their psychological health and safety, but anyone that is in a workplace has that
Mm.
potential.
Now, there were since you mentioned first responders, there were changes in that legislation several years ago now that risks to psychological safety are no longer considered to be just part of the job. Can you talk a little bit about that around how some jobs are inherently more present more physical risk? So does that then just mean that that's kind of what you sign up for?
I'm so glad you asked that question because this is my passion at the moment. is that we would not put somebody on a construction site without giving them the proper protective equipment. So we're protecting the parts of that person that are exposed, probably exposed to risk. We know that if you are a first responder, that you are probably exposed to trauma. And we know ways to prepare a mind to be exposed to trauma in a way that is less likely to damage. We can't protect everybody all the time, but we now know that if we can help somebody to be objective, to be able to put things in perspective, to know that they're doing what they are trained to do, and to expect that, for instance, if they go to a call and one of the victims in the call looks or sounds or reminds them of a family member, we know that can trigger a traumatic response. But do we actually train these first responders for this exposure, or do we just train them how to save the victims, how to save the people that they're serving? I know we can do better. I believe that we should do better. I believe that it is the same as protecting the feet and the heads of construction
Mm.
workers.
Do you find that, the conversation around psychological health and safety has been ongoing for several years now since the release of the national standard? And well before that, obviously, the national standard was brought together because there already was a conversation. But especially since then, do you notice in your work certain industries or lines of work that are really taking up the mantle on this, that it's really becoming very popular or very ingrained in that industry to look after psychological health and safety in a better way?
So, I mean, I live in my little bubble. I have a very skewed perspective because all of the people who come to me care. All of the people, all of the employers that come to me and say, we want to engage your services, we want your consulting, we want you to help, all of them care about their employees, care about their psychological health and safety, even if they don't have the language for it. And so in my little world, there's people in every sector that care. Now, in some sectors, certain things have happened, whether it is loss or changes in the business situation or changes in the social situation. There are certain sectors that are very interested, and they really range from like mining and oil to healthcare. It's where there's this awakening to we can do better, um, both from a bottom line perspective, from a customer service perspective, but also for the well-being of our employees. And so they are starting as sectors to be willing and motivated to take action.
Is there, I think that maybe there's a common misperception that sort of male dominated industries, and you mentioned mining, for example, or automotive work, manufacturing, things of that nature. That they might just be inherently rougher or less safe, or that kind of hyper masculinity thing I'm thinking of. Is there an industry that you really wish you could crack, like that you could really get in there and that needs the work and that you think you could do some really good work in?
So, first, let me say the men that I'm talking to um, are uh, not the stereotypical, um, and I think men in general don't fit the stereotypes anymore. I think we need to give them more credit for emotional intelligence and social intelligence than we traditionally have. I know all the jokes and I know all the things, and I've been guilty of using them sometimes. But I think men are evolving and they understand. Like, you look at the people that work in safety, and interviewed one guy and he said, we've known in safety for a long time that if people are not focused, that's when injuries happen. And we know that that focus can be impaired by their psychological health and safety, by their mental health, by the way they feel about the other people that they work at. So first, let me debunk the myth that men are knuckle dragging cave people that don't know, because I don't believe that. But then when you talk about the industries that we want to get into, I think about Senator Michael Kirby saying, and this would be 15 years ago probably, to not try to convince the people who aren't ready, because you can use so much energy, so much of your resources on them. Help the people that are ready for it, help the people that are asking for it, and the others will watch them. And then they'll want to do the same. They'll watch their success. They'll watch them improve their bottom line. They'll watch them improve their attraction and retention of employees. So to answer your question, is there any industry I want to crack? All of them. But I'll spend my time and attention on those who are ready.
I remember I did an event, a speaking event. It must have been probably 10 years ago now, for the United Steelworkers. And there were 8,000 predominantly men in a big convention hall, I think in Philadelphia. Guys who wear overalls to a conference. And it was one of the best events I ever did, because you have all this stuff in your head about what you think it's going to be. And it was the exact opposite. They were so open and generous with their emotion and their thoughts and their insights. So, I think it really busts that myth as well. But I want to go sort of up the ladder of responsibility, I guess, in terms of who is involved in psychological health in the workplace. So what can the individual worker do to be an effective champion for a mentally healthy workplace, whatever their industry is?
It, the same thing I say to employers: first, do no harm, right? As an employee, you have an impact on everybody that you interact with in the workplace. Think about that impact. Sure, you're frustrated some days, or you're annoyed, or, you're not feeling great, but you still have an impact. And think about what that is and how you can do it. And it's the same as when I speak to an employee who's having problems with their leader. There is this certain population who think leaders aren't human, that leaders can't have a mental health issue, that leaders can't have families falling apart, that leaders should have their emotions in control all the time and be aware of everybody else's emotions. But we need to humanize, as employees, the way we treat each other and the way we treat our leaders, to make that. Now, that doesn't mean be a doormat and roll over and let people do what they want, including leaders. You can coach up, and, I talk to people about that. How do you coach up and say, I can see you're frustrated, but your yelling at me isn't helping me to do what you need me to do. Can we sit down and talk about it? There's ways to be empowered as an employee. You don't need rank to be able to interact. But the other piece for employees is the more self-aware we are of how our emotions impact us, how they impact our behaviors, the more self-aware we are, then the easier it is for us to have a neutral or positive effect on the workplace. So every employee has that ability. But what I would say is you also have a right to take back control and responsibility for the quality of your life, including the quality of your life at work.
Now, what about, I mean, you mentioned managing up or coaching up to the manager. So what about at that line manager level, the supervisors? They're dealing with people who, they're leading people who may or may not have mental health challenges, but that's almost irrelevant when creating a psychologically healthy workplace, I think. And they're also responding to people above them as well, certain demands on them. So how can the manager in the trenches lead a more mentally healthy team?
That's a big, big, big question, because the answer, as my legal friends would say, is it depends, right? It depends on the leader and their current emotional state, their current mental health. Depends on the pressure and demands that they have put upon them, whether they're reasonable or they're not. And it depends on their ability to lead in a way that doesn't cost them their own mental health. But to give you some really quick answers to that small question that's huge, is to stop trying to fix people, to stop trying to tell people what they need to do, and instead start to manage from a place of, my responsibility is to help you be successful while you're at work. That's what I'm trying to do, not to catch you doing something wrong, not to point out every deficit that you have in my eyes, but to say, how can I help you be successful in your job? I'm not your counselor. I'm not your therapist. I can't tell you, or I shouldn't tell you, how to live your life. But let's talk about what it's like while you're here in the workplace. And let me share with you some ideas, and you decide how you can optimize who you are while you're at work. I think both the bleeding heart leader who gets enmeshed in their employees' lives, and the real hard-nosed leader, I usually say something else, but we will make it. But the hard-nosed leader who just says, suck it up, cupcake, there's either one of those is problematic. And we have to come to a balance where leaders understand they're supporting the success of their employees at work. And that is the extent of it. Now, do they link them to other resources? Sure. Do they hold them accountable for their performance? Sure. But the focus is there in that middle ground.
I find that employers don't often like when you talk about or make analogies to parenting because it feels paternalistic and all that stuff. But it very much reminds me of parenting styles, the authoritative versus authoritarian, or permissive on the other end, and really finding that sweet spot where there's structure, but there's flexibility within that structure. Is that a fair kind of way to look at it?
Yes, it's a balanced way, but these aren't our children. They are adults. And when we treat adults like children, then the responses should be childlike. When we treat adults like adults who can think and make decisions for themselves, then we get adults who are stepping up. And so, yes, I understand why the parenting analogy is resisted. But on the other hand, it is that as a parent and as a leader and as a friend and as a family member, if we can be balanced and respectful in the way we interact, we're going to have better results. Mark, I would have considered myself, with pride, mind you, a rescuer when I was younger, and then came to the understanding that, who the heck am I to decide that you need rescuing, that you learning to take care of yourself, you learning to solve your own problems with my emotional support for you, isn't better for you. If I rescue you, what's going to happen the next time? What's going to happen when I'm not there? And so, with really great intentions, I was messing up. And now I've understood that if I say, Mark, that sounds like a problem. What do you think you should do? How do you want to handle this? What is the outcome you want? I'm doing more for you than saying, let me take care of this.
Yeah, the reminds me of the helicopter parent, to continue the parenting analogy, or the micromanager. Maybe they're the same thing. But let's look
Yeah.
at the top level then, the executive level, your top leadership. How can they set the tone or advance the cause at the board and executive level of a mentally healthy workplace?
And, in defense of top level executives, they have a lot of pressure because if they don't make sure that the business or, organization or whatever it is, department is not sustainable, they're going to put a lot of people at risk of being out of a job, which is really bad for their mental health. So their first priority is sustainability and the success of whatever it is they're running. These other things, they can't do the day to day in any large organization. They can't be in the trenches with psychological health and safety every day. But there are a few things they can do. One is they can state unequivocally that psychological health and safety is a strategic goal of their organization and that people will be held accountable to it. They don't even have to say how or why. When they make that statement, you can bet that their leaders are going to be, well, if this is going to be part of my recognition area, I better figure out what it means and I better figure out how to do it. So just that statement from a senior leader that this matters and you're going to be held accountable to it can make a huge difference. The other thing, of course, is that they need to walk the talk. They need to treat other people in the way they want other people to treat their direct reports. And that's, I've seen some amazing leaders who do that in spades, and you see how it trickles down. The third thing is that they need to ask the question with every policy they approve, with every plan, every strategy, every decision they make. How might this impact the psychological health and safety of our stakeholders, whether that is their clients, their employees, their vendors, their suppliers? It doesn't matter. How might this impact psychological health and safety of the people that we touch? Those three things don't take up a lot of a CEO or an executive director's time, but the ripple effect can be huge.
Hmm. Let's talk a little bit about unions. Even though they're not present in every workplace, they are present in many. And what role can unions have in safeguarding the psychological health and safety of a workplace?
Mark, when the standard was first released, that's 2013, I was talking to one of the large unions in the country. And I said, I really can see a day when the unions take up psychological health and safety because it's in the interest of their members, right? To protect psychological health and safety. When the unions walk the talk themselves as employers and as union members, that their behaviors, their interactions are done in a psychologically safe way. And they are in some unions. I'm telling you, there isn't the bullying, screaming, intimidating. That's not how every union operates. That I can see employers see the unions as a partner, that thank you for helping us with this. Thank you for supporting psychological health and safety for all the members. Thank you for being the eyes, ears, and the help for us to do that. So I really think psychological health and safety is a place where union and management can come together because it's a shared desire that members are psychologically healthy and safe. And I can see, sure, collective bargaining, there's going to be disagreement. That's all right. You're still going to fight for the rights, and those sort of things. But in every other interaction, that it's a partnership.
I think anytime people talk about and wonder about mentally healthy workplaces, invariably I find the conversation comes up around what to do with a so-called toxic individual, somebody who's compromising the mental health of the workplace. What are your tips or recommendations around that if somebody is identified as having a net negative impact on the whole team? How can the workplace then deal with that?
So first, can I tell you what not to
Please.
do?
Yeah.
Yeah. Don't do another respect in the workplace training. Don't do team building exercises. Don't do things where you're telling the entire group that they need to change their behaviors. And don't keep having a talk over and over again with that person, thinking that it's changed. So those are the things not to do. What you do, and I say people are not manageable because somebody decided to give them free will. I don't know where that decision came from, but that's how it is. So people are not manageable. Agreements are manageable. So when I am called in to deal with somebody who is toxic to an entire team, I sit down with them and I ask them 3 questions. We come up with an agreement about how they will behave going forward. I don't get into the he said, she said investigation, who's right, who's wrong, because it doesn't matter. What matters is today and from now on, there is an agreement about how you will behave and there will be consequences if it doesn't happen. Because too often, this is allowed to continue until good employees leave or are disabled by the stress of this one toxic person. And even if the toxic person is somebody who is dealing with a mental illness, and let me tell you, of the thousands of people with mental illness that I have had the privilege of interacting with, very few of them are actually toxic. And when we look at the people who are toxic, it's often their personal history, the things they're going through right now, learned behavior, and it has to be stopped. So whether the person needs an accommodation or they don't, they need to not behave that way in the workplace. They need to not do harm to others. So you come up with an agreement that's very clear about what behaviors are acceptable, which ones are not, and that there's consequences that are known in advance for going forward. Now, this whole process, Mark, is done in a way that is recognizing the frustration, the aggravation, the stress that the individual has been under that has motivated these behaviors that are toxic to others, but also in a way that is very clear. This is a process to support you to be able to go to work, do a good job, and go home at the end of the day with some energy left over. But it's also very clear that there's certain behaviors that are not to be tolerated.
Certain industries come to mind where, the almost archetypal toxic person is the biggest earner or the biggest producer, or they get the job done kind of thing. So, what's the return on investment or the business case for if that person does have to go out the door and they're taking all of that earning potential with them? Why is that a good thing for the company if it's in the interest of psychological health and safety?
If you look at cases where this has been allowed to go on, and you look at the cost of turnover, you look at the cost of grievances, you look at the cost of people off on stress leave, the earnings that one person makes are very rarely going to exceed the cost they have to the bottom line of the business. It's a false savings to say, well, they're bringing in, $1 million in revenue. Okay, but what's going out the door because of them? And I would say, again, that employers sometimes are ignorant to what's going on because everybody wants to give them the good news, give them the things that are going well, and look at this, and we're achieving. Somebody needs to have the guts to say to a leader, this is the impact that this person is having, and what would you like to do about it? But we're often afraid, right? Afraid to say that. And the beauty of getting to be my age, Mark, is you're afraid of nothing. And so you can say things that when I was your age, I would never have said, right? Because you're worried about your career, you're worried about, your reputation, your image. And then you get older and you go, what are you going to do to me? I'm going to tell you the truth as I know it.
Well, I think we can ideally do that at any age if it's a psychologically healthy workplace that allows for that.
Well,
Let's
yeah.
talk a little bit about that then, and let's sort of, uh, I guess, wrap it up here. Maybe we've talked about the toxic folks, we've talked about some of the strategies, but it's just as important, if not more important, to celebrate the people who are doing a good job. So, how can we celebrate people who are contributing to mentally healthy workplaces? And I understand that you're involved with an award as well to recognize this at the higher level as well. So, how can we celebrate good work in this space?
Yeah, so I really do encourage people to look for those things. So you're talking about the Canadian Work and Wellbeing Award, and that organizations should apply for them not because they want the pat on the back, but because they're sharing and motivating other employers. That's the real reason to do it. But there's another place where the pat on the back really could make a difference, and that is from employees to leaders who are doing it well. So don't underestimate the value of you saying to your leader, I was having a really bad day and you gave me some latitude, or you said that's okay. It made a difference to me. Or, you come in and you're always engaging with us and it feels like you care about who we are. There's so many leaders who genuinely are trying to do the right thing and they just feel like no matter what they do, it's not good enough. So we can help in that way. And leaders, in the same way, should start to look to comment on effort, not just outcome. You've got that person who comes in every day, they quietly do their work, they don't make waves, they're not the star performer. But it's the backs of these people, these quiet, consistent, everyday workers that allow these other people who are, running off and doing big things, failing big, but coming back. It's that consistency of the quieter workers that keep us going. So notice them, comment, tell them how you appreciate them. They don't need as much of the coddling as some of the star performers do, but they still need to be recognized. So there's so much we can do just by opening our eyes and noticing other people.
And ideally pay a livable wage as well, because I don't imagine a pizza party is going to correct for that.
Okay, well, we can talk about the livable wage because that is a whole other thing that I feel strongly about. But
We'll save
yes,
that for another one,
that's
maybe. Mary Ann, thank you so much for chatting with me today.
it's always a pleasure to talk to you, Mark. Thank you for having me on.